The sun hung over the village of Omalu like a golden shield, but its light could not warm the coldness that was about to erupt in the marketplace. It was the day of the festival of first fruits, a time when every family brought the best of their harvest to show their gratitude. Amina, a gentle weaver with eyes like deep pools of peace, stood quietly by her husband, Malik. For 12 long years, they had walked to this festival with empty hands but full hearts, hoping that this year would finally be their time. Amina's loom had produced the finest indigos the village had ever seen, yet her womb remained as silent as a stone at the bottom of a river. Beside her stood Farida, her closest friend since they were children. Farida was surrounded by her 3 boisterous sons who laughed and wrestled in the dust. Everyone thought these 2 women were as close as the thread and the needle. They shared secrets, meals, and laughter. But as the drums reached a fever pitch, Farida did something that would change Omalu forever. She stepped onto a wooden bench, her face twisting into a mask of sudden, sharp cruelty that no one recognized. The music died instantly as Farida pointed a long, accusing finger at Amina. Her voice did not shake. It cut through the air like a butcher's blade. "Why do we allow a dry well to sit among fruiting trees?" Farida bellowed, her eyes gleaming with a strange, dark fire. 12 years we have watched Amina come here with nothing but excuses. A woman without a child is like a house without a roof. She is a hollow husk that invites the wind of misfortune into our village. Amina felt the wall tilt. She looked at Farida, waiting for the punchline of a joke, but she saw only cold, jagged hate. The crowd gasped, a collective sound like a rushing wind. Amina remembered the countless nights she had spent sewing tiny tunics for Farida's sons, pouring her love into the fabric because she had no children of her own to clothe. She remembered Farida's soft whispers of encouragement that now felt like poisoned honey. Farida continued to scream, claiming Amina was cursed by the ancestors. Behind the scenes, Farida had spent years burying sour charms under Amina's window, praying for the very barrenness she was now publicly mocking with such calculated malice. The heavy silence that followed was thick enough to choke the breath from one's lungs. Malik, a man of quiet strength and endless patience, stepped forward and wrapped a protective arm around Amina's trembling shoulders. "My wife is not a husk," he said, his voice low and vibrating with a power that made the elders lean in. "She is the heart of my home, and her value is not measured by the number of cries in our house. Shame on you, Farida, for turning a festival of joy into a feast of thorns." But the damage was done. The village whispers had already begun to move like a wildfire through dry grass. Amina looked at the faces of her neighbors and saw pity mixed with a new, ugly suspicion. She realized that the home she loved was now haunted by the echoes of her best friend's curse. Every corner of her cottage felt smaller, every shadow longer. She knew she could not simply stay and weep. That night, as the moon hid behind a veil of clouds, Amina packed a simple cloth bag with dried fruit and a flask of water. She had to find the truth. Amina did not follow the well-worn paths to the market or the river. Instead, she turned her feet toward the forbidden marsh. This was a place where the sun rarely touched the damp earth and where the trees were said to weep for the things the world had forgotten. The air here was thick with the scent of ancient moss and the hum of spirits that did not care for the laws of men. The village elders warned that no one returned from the marsh with the same soul they took in. But Amina's heart was already broken. She had nothing left to fear. She sought the mother of the lost, a spirit her grandmother had described in riddles told over a dying fire. The ground grew soft and treacherous under her sandals, and the mist began to swirl around her ankles like ghostly fingers. The trees groaned, their branches reaching out like gnarled arms. Amina did not turn back. She pushed through the waist-high ferns, her mind focused on one thing. Why had her life been a desert, while her friend's was an ocean? She walked until the village was a distant memory. Deep within the heart of the marsh, where the water turned to silver under the moonlight, Amina heard a high, pained whimper. She followed the sound until she found a small creature, a fox with fur as bright as a new coin, trapped in a cruel snare. The trap was made of grief iron, a metal that grew hotter the more its victim struggled. The fox's leg was bleeding, and its eyes were wide with a terror that mirrored Amina's own soul. Amina knelt in the mud, her heart breaking for the small animal. She reached out to pull the metal jaws apart, but the iron hissed, scorching her skin instantly. A normal person would have pulled away, but Amina did not. She gripped the burning metal with her bare hands, her teeth gritted against the agony. "I know what it is to be trapped by a pain you did not ask for," she whispered through the sting of tears. She pulled with all her might until the trap snapped open. The fox fell free, but Amina's hands were blistered and blackened. She did not care. She watched the creature with a smile of pure mercy as it limped toward the mist. The fox did not run away. Instead, it stopped and began to glow with a light so bright that Amina had to shield her eyes. When she looked again, the animal was gone. Standing in its place was a tall, ethereal woman made of moonlight and swelling smoke. This was the weaver of mists. Her voice sounded like 1,000 flutes playing in the distance. "Amina," the spirit said, touching the woman's burnt hands and healing them with a single breath. "You have passed the test of the bleeding hand. You chose mercy when you were drowning in your own sorrow." The spirit leaned in close, her eyes like stars. "You have wondered why your house was silent for 12 years. Know this: your womb was not empty. It was being used as a spiritual shield." Farida's heart turned to darkness long ago, and she sought to consume the light of your lineage. If you had birthed children in those years, the shadows she called would have taken them and used them against the world. Your weight was your protection, but the shield has served its purpose, and the law of the borrowed breath is now in motion. The weaver of mists reached into the air and pulled out 4 glowing heavy seeds that shimmered with the colors of the rainbow. They felt warm in Amina's palms, pulsing with a life that made her fingertips tingle. "These are not seeds for the mouth," the spirit warned, her expression becoming solemn. "These are the seeds of silence, one for patience, one for truth, one for mercy, and one for justice. Go back to your home, Amina. Do not speak of what you saw. Do not shout at your enemy. Instead, dig up the very center of your cottage floor. Plant these seeds in the earth of your hearth and water them every day with a cup of your own forgiveness. As they grow, the truth will rise, and the debt that was stolen from you will be repaid in ways the village will never forget. But remember, once the plants bloom, there is no turning back. The justice of the earth is absolute, and it will find the heart that is rotted just as easily as it finds the heart that is pure." Amina bowed low, clutching the precious seeds to her chest. When Amina returned to Omalu, she was a different woman. She walked through the marketplace with a quiet dignity that confused the villagers who had expected to see her broken. Farida stood by her stall of peppers, leaning over to whisper a nasty comment to a neighbor, but Amina did not even look her way. She went straight to her cottage, where Malik was waiting with a worried face. Without a word of explanation, Amina grabbed a sturdy hoe and began to dig up the dirt floor in the center of their living space. Malik watched in silence, trusting his wife, even when the neighbors gathered at the window to laugh. "The grief has finally taken her mind," they whispered. Farida stood at the back of the crowd, a smug smile on her face as she watched Amina toil in the dirt. Amina ignored the sneers and the laughter. She carefully placed the 4 seeds into the dark earth, covering them gently. That night, and every night after, she knelt by the spot and whispered words of forgiveness for those who had hurt her. She was the mad weaver to the village, but she was a mother in waiting. As Amina tended to her hidden garden, a strange rot began to take hold of Farida's house. It started with the food. The grain in her granary turned to grey ash overnight, and the water in her jars tasted like salt and bitterness. Her 3 sons, who had once been her pride, suddenly became lazy and violent. They fought with each other until the walls shook, and they spoke to Farida with tongues of fire and disrespect. Farida's skin began to look sallow and grey, and her hair grew brittle like dead grass. She could not understand why her life was falling apart, while she had everything she wanted. She looked across the path at Amina's humble cottage and felt a rising tide of fury. Amina's home seemed to glow with a soft inner light, and the scent of fresh rain and jasmine constantly drifted from her door. Envy began to eat Farida from the inside. A black worm coiled around her heart. She did not know that the law of the borrowed breath was reclaiming what she had stolen. The seeds in Amina's floor were drinking the darkness Farida sent and turning it into something miraculous. The first miracle happened in the middle of a moonless night. A golden beam of light shot through the thatch of Amina's roof, so bright it woke the birds in the trees. Malik jumped from his bed, thinking the house was on fire, but he found Amina kneeling by the hearth. Where the first seed had been planted, the earth had opened, and lying there was a baby boy. He did not cry. He looked up with eyes that held the wisdom of the stars and a sense that reminded Malik of the first rain after a long drought. The village was jolted awake by the light, and soon the cottage was surrounded by people peering through the door. Amina picked up the child, her heart overflowing with a joy that had no words. The child's skin was as smooth as polished ebony, and his presence brought a peace to the room that was almost physical. Farida stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands shaking and her heart pounding against her ribs. She felt a sharp, stabbing pain in her womb, a reminder of the knot she had tied 12 years ago. The miracle did not stop with one child. For 4 consecutive nights, the golden light erupted from the cottage floor. By the 5th morning, Amina and Malik were the parents of 4 beautiful, identical infants. The village was paralyzed with awe and a creeping sense of shame for how they had treated the weaver. They began to call the babies the children of the dawn. Each child represented one of the seeds: patience, truth, mercy, and justice. They did not behave like normal infants. They watched the world with a calm, penetrating gaze that made the dishonest look away. The air in Omalu seemed to change, becoming clearer and lighter, as if a great weight was being lifted from the soil. Amina moved through her house with the grace of a queen, her 12 years of sorrow replaced by a radiance that blinded those who had mocked her. Malik walked in the field with a song on his lips, his strength doubled by the joy of his fatherhood. But across the village, Farida was drowning in a sea of her own making, her house a place of shadows and screaming. Driven by a mixture of terror and a desperate need to reclaim her status, Farida decided to visit Amina. She put on a fake smile and carried a jar of her finest honey, pretending she had come to offer an apology. "Oh, my dear friend," Farida cooed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "The spirits have truly blessed you. I was wrong to doubt the ancestors' timing. Please, let me see the miracles so I can bless them too." As she entered the cottage, she reached out her hand to touch the nearest infant's head. But as her fingers moved closer, the honey in her jar began to bubble and hiss. Before the eyes of Malik and Amina, the golden liquid turned into black, bitter gall that smelled of rot. Farida shrieked and dropped the jar, the glass shattering on the floor. The infant did not flinch. They simply looked at her with a collective gaze that felt like a hot sun on her face.
Farida felt her skin begin to itch and crawl. She backed out of the house, realizing that her touch was now a poison to anything that was pure. Farida's world was crumbling. Her sons had run away to the neighboring hills, refusing to stay in a house that felt like a tomb. Her husband had left her for his brother's farm, unable to stand her constant bitter rants. Alone and desperate, Farida returned to the dark forest at the edge of the Seven Kingdoms. She sought the same sorcerer she had visited 12 years ago, the man who had helped her tie Amina's womb. She found him sitting in a hut made of bones, his eyes milky with age but sharp with malice. "Why has the knot untied?" Farida screamed, throwing her last few gold coins at his feet. "You promised me that I would be the only one with the bloom. You promised me she would be a husk forever. Now she has 4 miracles, and my own house is a graveyard of ash." The sorcerer picked up a coin and beat it, a cruel smile spreading across his toothless mouth. "The knot did not untie, Farida," he chuckled, a sound like dry leaves skittering on a grave. "It was burned away by the fire of a heart that knows how to forgive." A flashback flickered in the smoke of the sorcerer's fire, showing a younger Farida 12 years ago. She had been jealous of Amina's beauty and the way Malik looked at his bride. She had stolen a piece of Amina's wedding veil, a fabric woven with prayers, and brought it to this very hut. "Take her bloom," she whispered then. "Let her wait and wait while I grow strong and full." The sorcerer had performed a dark bargain, diverting the breath of life from Amina's path to Farida's. For 12 years, Farida had lived on a borrowed blessing, thriving on the life that was meant for her friend. But the weaver of mists had seen the theft. The sorcerer leaned forward, the fire casting long dancing shadows on the walls. "You made a shadow bargain, Farida. You thought you were clever, but the earth is a slow and perfect bookkeeper. You borrowed 12 years of her light to fuel your own pride. Now, the law of the borrowed breath has turned its face toward you. The debt has come due, and it must be paid with interest." Farida's eyes widened in horror as the sorcerer's words sank in. "What do you mean, interest?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The old man laughed, a harsh, hacking sound. "You borrowed 12 years of her life. Now you must pay with 12 years of your own light. But because you mocked her in the square, because you used the blessing to hurt the one who loved you, the repayment will be fourfold. Every joy you took will be returned to her as a miracle, and every lie you told will become a stone in your own path." Farida begged for a way to stop the reversal, offering her jewelry and her house, but the sorcerer shook his head. "Darkness can only hide the truth for so long. When the sun rises 4 times, the light you stole will fully return to its rightful owner, and you will be left with only the emptiness you tried to give her." Farida ran from the hut, the forest branches catching her hair and tearing her clothes. She felt as though the very trees were whispering her name in judgment, the wind carrying the scent of the 4 children she hated.
Back in Omalu, Amina's children were growing at a rate that defied every law of nature. Within a few weeks, they were walking and speaking with a clarity that silenced the village. They did not play like other children. They sat in the square and spoke with the wisdom of the oldest ancestors. They began to walk through the village, their small feet leaving glowing prints in the dust. They were the voices of justice. One child would stop before a merchant and quietly mention the hidden weight he used to cheat the poor. Another would look at an elder and speak of the secret land he had stolen from a widow. They did not shout, they simply forced the truth into the open air. The village was transformed. Secrets that had been buried for decades were revealed, and those who had lived in the shadows were forced to make amends. Amina watched them from her doorway, her heart filled with a mixture of pride and awe. She realized that her children were not just hers, they were a gift to the soul of Omalu,
sent to wash the village clean of its hidden rot. Farida watched the children from her window, her mind fracturing under the weight of her fear. She knew that it was only a matter of time before they walked to her door and revealed the ultimate secret, the theft of Amina's 12 years. She decided she could not let that happen. If she could silence the children, perhaps she could stop the debt from being paid. She spent the night in her dark, cold kitchen, brewing a soup laced with the root of night, a deadly plant that caused a sleep from which no one ever woke. Her hands shook as she chopped the root, the bitter fumes making her eyes water. She told herself she was doing it for her sons, for her husband, for her honor. But the truth was that she was doing it for her own pride. She planned to take the soup to Amina's house as a peace offering for the entire family. She believed that if the miracles were gone, the world would go back to the way it was, and she would be the favored one once again. She did not realize that she was walking into a trap set by her own hands. The moon was high when Farida crept across the path to Amina's cottage. Malik was away at the distant market, and the village was silent. She moved like a predator in the dark, clutching the pot of poisoned soup to her chest. She reached the door and found it unlocked, as Amina never feared the night. Farida slipped inside, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She saw the 4 children sleeping on their woven mats, their faces peaceful in the moonlight. She approached the first child, her spoon raised, but suddenly the air in the room changed. It became thick and heavy, like warm honey, making every movement feel as though she were moving underwater. The shadows on the walls began to lengthen and twist, taking on the shapes of the weaver of mists. Farida tried to speak, but her tongue felt like a lead weight in her mouth. She felt a sudden, freezing chill that seemed to come from the ground itself. The children did not move, but Farida could feel their eyes watching her from behind their closed lids. Suddenly, the 4 children rose as one, their movements perfectly synchronized. They did not cry out in alarm. They began to chant in a low, vibrating tone that shook the very foundation of the cottage. The sound was not a scream, but a harmony that felt like it was pulling the truth out of the air. Farida felt the vibration in her bones, her teeth rattling in her head. The pot of poisoned soup in her hands began to glow with a sickly green light before it shattered into 1,000 pieces, the liquid turning to harmless steam as it hit the floor. Farida fell to her knees, her eyes wide with terror. "We are the seeds of silence," the children spoke in a single unified voice that sounded like a rushing river. "We are the years that were stolen. We are the prayers that were ignored. You cannot silence the truth with the root of the night." Farida tried to scramble away, but her feet felt as though they were rooting into the dirt floor. She was trapped in the light of the miracles she had tried to destroy.
The children did not use violence. Instead, they gently reached out and took Farida's hands. Their skin felt like warm sunshine, but to Farida, it was a heat that scorched her soul. They led her out of the cottage and into the village square, their presence lighting up the night as if the sun had decided to rise early. One by one, the villagers woke and opened their doors, drawn by the supernatural glow and the low, beautiful chanting. They gathered in a massive circle, their faces showing a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. Amina stood in her doorway, her face calm and her eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful pity. The children stood in the center of the square, holding the trembling Farida between them. "The marketplace is the place of the word," the children said, their voices carrying to the farthest corners of Omalu. "Here, a lie was told that broke a heart. Here, the truth shall be written so that even the stones may read it." Farida wept, her tears leaving black streaks on her grey, sallow skin.
The children touched the ground of the marketplace simultaneously. A sudden, violent wind whipped through the square, but it did not blow the dust away. Instead, the red dust of Omalu began to swell and rise into the air, forming living pictures that everyone could see. It was like a high-definition vision made of earth and light. The village watched in a horrified silence as they saw a younger Farida at the sorcerer's hut 12 years ago. They saw her steal the wedding veil. They heard her voice whispering the curse. They saw the dark bargain being struck. The pictures changed, showing Farida burying the charms under Amina's window, her face twisted with a jealousy that had lasted for a decade. The truth was no longer a whisper, it was a physical presence that no one could deny. Farida's mockings in the square at the festival were replayed in the dust, her words now sounding like the hollow rattles of a dying soul. The villagers looked from the visions to the broken woman in the center of the square, their hearts turning to cold lead. As the visions faded, the village turned their backs on Farida as one. The silence was more devastating than any shout. The hollow husk she had called Amina was now revealed to be a fertile garden of the spirit, while Farida's own body began to manifest the rot she had hidden for so long. She felt a terrible heaviness in her limbs, her skin beginning to harden and turn gray like old stone. Her breath became short and raspy, smelling of salt and bitterness. She reached out to her old neighbors, begging for a hand, but no one moved. Even her sons, who had returned to see the truth, looked away in shame. Amina stepped into the center of the circle, her gold-braided hair shimmering. She looked at Farida not with anger, but with a grief that made the elders weep. "You were my sister, Farida," Amina said softly. "You had 3 beautiful sons and a home of plenty, but you could not be happy because you wanted my peace too. You traded our love for a shadow, and now the shadow is all you have left."
Amina had the power to ask for Farida's banishment or her death. The village was ready to do whatever the Queen Sage commanded. But Amina reached into her silk wrapper and pulled out a single small seed, the seed of mercy that the weaver of mists had mentioned. She walked toward the hardening, graying Farida and held it out. "I waited 12 years for my miracles," Amina said, her voice steady. "I will not waste a single moment on revenge. Take this seed, Farida. If you can find it in your heart to truly repent, to ask the earth for forgiveness for the theft of my time, you may yet find a way back to the light. The choice is yours." The village held its breath. This was the final moment of redemption. But Farida looked at the seed and then at Amina's beautiful, honored face. Her pride, even in the face of her own destruction, was a mountain that would not move. She let out a final bitter laugh and spat on the ground at Amina's feet. "I would rather be stoned than owe my life to a weaver of rags," she hissed. Because she refused the final act of grace, the law of the borrowed breath reached its absolute conclusion. In a shocking, cinematic moment, Farida's body began to stretch and twist. Her gray, hardened skin turned into rough, salt-covered bark. Her arms reached toward the sky, turning into gnarled, leafless branches that looked like pleading hands frozen in mid-air. Her feet rooted deep into the marketplace soil, and her eyes became 2 knots in the wood that forever stared at the ground she had tried to poison. Within seconds, where a woman once stood, there was now a twisted, bitter-tasting tree. It was a pillar of salt and bark that provided no shade for the traveler and grew no fruit for the hungry. The village of Omalu watched in a sacred terror. The tree stood as a permanent monument to envy, a silent teacher for generations to come. The air around the tree remained cold and salty, a far cry from the warmth that emanated from the rest of the thriving village. The justice of the ancestors was complete, and the debt was paid in full. Amina's 4 children grew up to be the legendary protectors of the 7 villages, known far and wide as the sages of truth. The village of Omalu became a place of immense prosperity and peace, for no lie could survive long in the presence of the children of the dawn. Amina and Malik grew old together in a house that was always filled with the scent of jasmine and the laughter of grandchildren. Amina continued to weave, her fabrics now considered sacred relics that brought peace to anyone who wore them. She often sat on her porch in the evening, watching the sun set behind the gnarled, salt-covered tree in the square. She felt no joy in Farida's fate, only a deep understanding of the mysteries of the heart. The story of the 12-year wait and the 4 miracles became the most famous folk tale in the land. And to this day, when travelers pass through Omalu, they stop at the gate to read the words carved into the stone. What happens to a heart that cannot celebrate another's joy? What lesson do you take from this story? Tell us in the comments below.